Hi, Graeme Robertson. You are a professor at the University of North Carolina, political science, author of Putin versus the People. And I thank you for taking this interview with us today. I wanted to start by saying that most of us thought that conflict in Europe was basically contained, that there were no more huge expansionist purposes in any of the European countries. But it seems that we were wrong, and President Putin is now trying to redraw borders again to change Europe's security reality. And some people have said that this is a Cold War. I would think that maybe it is a very hot war rather than a Cold War. I would start by asking you, Putin seems to have expected that the war in Ukraine would be short and easy. Did he miscalculate?
He miscalculated disastrously. I think it was clear to anyone who's been to Ukraine. I've done a lot of research in Ukraine over the last 10 years. Anyone who knows Ukraine at all knew that the Ukrainians would fight for every inch of land. There was signs all over Ukraine, and the hashtag every inch was out long before this invasion. They knew that the Ukrainian army was much better equipped than it previously was. It was better trained than it previously was. And so the force would be much more motivated. And then even if the Russians were successful, they'd have to hold very hostile territory, against the population who would launch an insurgency. And I think that was obvious to everybody outside of the Kremlin before the war, which is why many of us thought there was no way a full-scale invasion like this would take place. It's simply too costly.
And I've seen some reporting in the ground in Ukraine, and they have even interviewed some of Russian soldiers that have come to say that they thought they were going to be received as libertarians, that they were liberating the people in Ukraine, and that when they have seen that people in Ukraine are trying to defend their country and are not considering the Russians as their saviors, they are appalled. They don't know why they are fighting. What is going on? What do people in Russia think of this war? What does the military think of this war? Do you know, Graeme?
It's really hard to tell. I know many people in Russia personally who and they're uniformly against the war, with the exception of people who are in government positions. If you have a government position, you are required to support the war, and people are very scared, very anxious about standing out. The military is a hierarchical institution, and they follow instructions. But Russians have been told for a long time now that there is a genocide going on in eastern Ukraine against Russian speakers, which is absolutely not true. It's absurd, and some of them believe that story. Those who've not taken the trouble to access Western media, which is actually freely available, or at least was until the war broke out in Russia. So it doesn't surprise me that conscripts who've been serving in the Russian army for a year would have no idea what the reality is. And it's just sad that they're being sent to kill people they have no intention of, no desire to kill.
Now, and do you have a sense of what oligarchs are thinking? I mean, I think they are probably in a place that is now inflicting some pain on their finances because of the sanctions. But I think that, they are kleptocrats, but I don't know if they want to be war criminals as well. I don't know. What do you think, Graeme?
Yeah, so I don't have a lot of sympathy for the oligarchs, but one of the oligarchs, Oleg Tinkov, tweeted the other day that he's no longer a billionaire and doesn't want to be called an oligarch anymore because he's lost so much money. It's not I don't find that particularly sad, but it's true that many of the oligarchs have lost a lot, and what it demonstrates is that they're not powerful people anymore in terms of politics. They're rich, but they don't have the political power that they had in the 1990s. Putin, the first thing he did when he came into power really was to subordinate the oligarchs and make them follow his line. And so the oligarchs basically have to do what Putin tells them. And that's been clear for a long time. They're supplicants rather than oligarchs now.
Okay. And well, if Putin does not have to listen to the oligarchs, they don't have any power over his decisions. And what the people in Russia think is something that Putin is not paying attention to, or that's what we see in Western media. Who does Putin listen to?
Right. So two things. Putin cares very much what people in Russia think. And his whole power has been based upon being popular and being seen as being, the protector of the Russian people. And this is important for getting people around him to obey him. So while he can be, seen as this leader of the nation, that's very important, which is why they've cut off all connections with international media, why they've closed down the remaining independent media in Russia, which was pretty lively up until just last week. And it's now virtually impossible in Russia to get information, real information about what's going on. And that shows how important to him popular support is. The people he listens to are less and less oligarchs and more what they call in Russian siloviki, which is people from the power ministries, people from the army, people from the former KGB, which is now called FSB, from the security services. Mm-hmm. And he's surrounded by those guys. They're all military people. They all follow very strictly the military hierarchy. And Putin's the commander-in-chief. He's a former KGB officer himself. And so those are the key people now. The trick for Putin is to make sure that those guys still continue to follow his orders. And the real threat to Putin now is if he orders something so radical and so dangerous that they disobey him, then he's in real trouble.
I'm thinking there, his threat on using nuclear weapons. Should we take this seriously? Do you think that would be a game changer in all these supports he has on former KGB agents?
Right. Yeah. I mean, sadly, we have to take it very seriously. There are leaks coming out of the Kremlin about plans to use tactical nuclear weapons, so short-range nuclear weapons, which will be almost impossible for us to shoot down, on infrastructure installations in Poland and other parts of Eastern Europe. So in other words, in NATO countries, this would be a radical escalation of the war, a dramatic escalation of the war. And, obviously they're leaking these stories to scare people in the West, to scare the Americans in particular. But that's because they have incentive to do it, doesn't mean it's not true. And so we're very worried about that. I think we should be very worried about that. And I think that's, like you say, this would be, if such a decision were taken, then it would be critical to see whether people actually obey and go forward with the orders. The Soviet army has a history of disobeying orders when it comes to the use of nuclear weapons. There was a very famous incident in 1986 when an officer was ordered to fire ballistic missiles because they had a false report of incoming missiles, and he refused. So there's some history here, but who knows how an individual will behave in a moment like that.
I'm also worried he might use chemical weapons, like he helped Bashar al-Assad use in Aleppo and other parts of Syria. And there, I don't know if the line between what's attainable and what's not for Russian ex-KGBs is different. Do you think he might use these chemical weapons in a sign of desperation because things are going so bad?
Absolutely. I don't see that being out of the question at all, unfortunately. And they've already used thermobaric weapons and other weapons that are, cluster bombs, other weapons that are already banned under international law. So there's very little barrier to them using those kinds of weapons, particularly if their ability to starve people out of the cities, which has really been the strategy so far. If that fails, sadly, I think Putin is capable of all sorts of things, and we shouldn't rule things out ex ante as being too horrible to think about, because sadly that we do have to think about them.
There's been a lot of speculation about Putin's mental stability, his age, that he's almost 70 years old, and he's starting to worry about his legacy. He seems isolated. Do you share these concerns, Graeme?
This is a really hard question because none of us know. To diagnose someone with some kind of mental illness, you need to be a therapist, right, and do actual interviews and talk to them. all we see are these images on television. We see these erratic decisions, these decisions that go way beyond his previous behavior. We see him angry in a way in public that he never showed himself to be before. So there's definitely a different tone and a different style and a different decision-making process. Whether that means he's losing it somehow, it's impossible to tell.
And do you think this could be the end of Putin?
I think that before the invasion of Ukraine, Putin would confidently die in his bed, still as president of Russia. I think now it's possible he could be overthrown. I think the discontent within the army, discontent with the oligarchs, as you mentioned, but more importantly, we'll see how much discontent there is amongst the military men around him at the very top. This has really opened the opportunity that maybe one day we'll be rid of Vladimir Putin before his term in office is over.